We've got breaking news out of the NBA where the Grizzlies are entertaining trade offers for Ja Morant. That's according to ESPN. After this season, the All-NBA guard will have 2 years remaining on his deal before becoming a free agent the 28 offseason. Grizzlies currently sit in 10th place in the West, have won just one playoff series during Morant's 7 seasons in Memphis. I'm Tommy Tran with Sam Quinn joining us here for the breaking news. So what's your reaction and thought process of what we're learning today, Sam?
Yeah, if anything, I think they're a little bit late on this, right? We were having these conversations 2 months ago when they got off to that slow start. They missed Washington as a potential trade destination. The Hawks got there first, traded Trae Young there earlier in the week. Ja Morant has been declining for the last couple of years. He doesn't get to the rim quite as much as he used to, doesn't get to the foul line quite as much as he used to. He has a bloated max contract, 2 years left. Trae Young only has the one after this year. Never been a great defender, all sorts of off-court issues. He's just a very risky trade candidate. It does seem like there might be a few interested parties because if you could just hone that talent, if you could just get him on the right track, maybe figure out physically what's wrong, get him back into the right shape, get him back up to where he's been in the past. You have a guard who gets to the rim at will, and that's just so valuable, even in this NBA that's moving away from small guards. So it does seem like there's a slightly bigger market for Ja Morant than there was Trae Young, but that value has gone down over the last couple months as he hasn't improved. So the Grizzlies right now are in the lottery. I don't know that they can expect a huge return here, but I think it's the right move. I think they needed to move in another direction. They just haven't been going anywhere this season.
Yeah, you put a lot of qualifiers out there for a guy with those 2 remaining years after this year, sitting at 42 and change and $44 million and change, respectively. You mentioned the trade value and how much it's dipped relatively in the last 2 months. So just give me a sense of the timeline of where this was when we were having this conversation off camera and behind the scenes 2 months ago and where we're sitting at today.
Yeah, I think the longer this has gone on, the more injuries that have racked up, the longer sample we've had where he's not quite getting to the rim at the same level. I think that's probably lowered the trade value, right? Where the upside to downside ratio in November was a little bit different than it is now, where a team like, say, Minnesota might have looked at this in November and said, well, you know what? We feel like Oklahoma City is so good that we have to take a risk like this in order to catch up with them. But as Ja hasn't quite gotten better over those last couple of months, as Oklahoma City has slipped a little bit, a team like Minnesota might sit here and say, you know what? Let's roll with what we have. We're playing well. I don't think we have to really rock the boat in order to take a shot at them. You know, I think the value now is probably slightly lower than it was a couple of months ago. This is going to vary very much from team to team, right? Everybody's going to look at the chances of getting him back on track differently. Everybody's going to have a different salary structure. I do think there's a little bit more appeal in Ja Morant at his best than Trae Young at his best, just given he has that very high value ability to get to the rim, whereas, you know, with Trae Young, it was a lot of pretty inefficient shots. So I do think there will be a little bit more interest there, but I do think the value is far lower than it's ever been. It's lower than Memphis certainly expected when they were putting out feelers in November.
That being said, what are some potential landing spots, you think?
I think 4 teams come to mind. Minnesota, obviously, we just covered, was one of the teams that was interested a couple of months ago. I think the Timberwolves are playing well enough now that they don't have to act desperately. What I will say, the complicating factor for them is they'd have to include one of their big men just to make the money work. Those big men, aside from Anthony Davis, are their identity, so I don't know how eager they're going to be to do that. Sacramento, another one, they've been interested. They organizationally just so lack an identity, a direction, that they might look at Ja Morant and say, hey, you know what? We get him in the building. We can just see if we can get him to play like an all-star again. Maybe that can propel us somewhere. It can get us back maybe into the play-in mix, and we can start to build around him. They weren't interested in Trae Young. There was reporting on that. So maybe they've decided that they want to stay in the lottery and rebuild through younger players. Toronto is one of these teams that just needs a talent boost, right? They don't have, I guess aside from Scotty Barnes, like that clear superstar, all-star caliber player. And they're already paying the luxury tax, so they're paying the budget for a contending team when nobody quite believes that they're ready to contend. They have a lot of mid-sized salaries that they could trade. They have their draft picks if that's what it takes. So that might be a team that might just look at this and say, hey, we're kind of in the middle here. We don't really have that much upside. Why don't we take the swing? And then the last team, the team that has to get mentioned in any bad contract conversation, is the Milwaukee Bucks, because they're desperate. When you're desperate, you do things that might not be quite rational. I don't know that Ja Morant is really a fit for them. You always need shooting around Giannis Antetokounmpo. Their offense has not been the issue. They're second in the NBA in effective field goal percentage. They can't rebound. They can't defend. They turn the ball over too much. Those are the problems. I don't know that Ja Morant helps. But if you're trying to convince Giannis Antetokounmpo that you can compete long-term, getting a younger all-star is probably a way to do that. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Bucks sniffed around this a little bit. I don't know the market is that robust, but with 4 possible teams that make some measure of sense, I think they'll be able to find a deal.
Okay, we are sitting inside of 1 month to the trade deadline in the association, and Sam Quinn joining us here with the breaking news that the Grizzlies are reportedly open to entertaining offers for their superstar in Ja Morant. If you take a look at tonight's notable games, I'll just leave you with this. Ja Morant, and where he ranks in franchise history: first in points per game, second in assists per game, first in playoff points per game, first in playoff assists per game.
What's up, everyone? Welcome into a fresh hour of CBS Sports HQ. I'm Jacqueline D'Agostino. We got a college football playoff matchup with Oregon and Indiana on deck tonight. We also have the wild card round of the NFL playoffs to look forward to. A lot of football talk, but first, the NBA making some waves today. The big news out of the association, where the Grizzlies are entertaining trade offers for Ja Morant. That is according to ESPN. Now, after this season, the All-NBA guard will have 2 years remaining on his deal before becoming a free agent in the 2028 offseason. Now, the Grizzlies currently sit in 10th place in the West and have won just 1 playoff series during Ja's 7 seasons in Memphis. All right, let's welcome in our NBA analyst, John Gonzalez, here to discuss. John, Ja Morant, there's been a lot of different things we have discussed with Ja in his time there in Memphis. But first thing, are you surprised by this move from the Grizzlies?
No, in fact, I think it's a little overdue, Jacqueline. I mean, look, Ja Morant is hyper athletic. He's dynamic when he's on the floor. But the problem is he's not on the floor all that often, right? I mean, he's only played 18 games this season. The last 2 seasons before this one combined, he had only been out there for 59 games. Because part of the reason, and, you know, there were the off-the-court issues that factored into this as well. But part of what makes him so exciting as a player, that reckless abandon where he throws his body around, he's undersized, right? So that frequently makes him unavailable. So at 26 years old, as you mentioned, 2 years left on his contract at $87 million. He's a career 31% three-point shooter. I don't know how much of a market there's going to be here. I think a couple years ago, you would have had a lot of takers for Ja Morant. Now, if you were going to say what's the deepest position in the entire NBA, well, it's lead guard. Almost nobody needs a lead guard. We just saw what happened with Trae Young, where the Atlanta Hawks signaled that they wanted to move on from him, and only Washington put their hand up and said, okay, we'll take him, and we'll only take him for C.J. McCollum's expiring contract and Corey Kispert. So not a huge return there. I think Ja Morant arguably has less value than Trae Young. So if you're the Grizzlies, yeah, you arrived at the correct answer here, but you probably did a little too late.
All right, so maybe a little bit overdue for Memphis. Now, if we zoom out, John, do you think this is maybe a potential teardown for the Grizzlies? Because as we know, Bane goes to Orlando. Everybody down there in Orlando saying thank you very much. But then if Ja leaves, is this the start or an indicator of a rebuild for Memphis, in your opinion?
It's definitely a different direction. I don't know that I'd necessarily call it a rebuild, because what they have on the books right now is Jaren Jackson Jr., who is the 2023 Defensive Player of the Year, and then just a bunch of young players who are some nice bit parts, right? I mean, Zach Edey, they're high on. He's been injured, but we'll see when he comes back. He had a good start to his season. Santi Aldama is only 24. Cedric Coward is a rookie. Jalen Wells is a sophomore. Cam Spencer, a little bit older than those other guys, but has shown some flashes in limited duty in relief of Ja Morant this year. So I think it's one of those situations where they go, hey, even with Ja Morant, this group isn't winning anything anytime soon. They're 16-21. They're 10th in the Western Conference. They're just barely clinging to that last play-in spot. They're behind the Blazers, who are ascendant. And I think that in Memphis, they finally figured out, okay, this group is probably not going anywhere. So let's reconstitute this. You could call it a rebuild. I don't know that it's necessarily going to be a teardown, where they're going to try to build around Jaren Jackson Jr. with some of these younger players and see what they have for the future.
So we won't say rebuild, maybe like a retweak or something.
Yeah.
We'll workshop it. John, we appreciate it. Talking about Ja Morant, as there are reports out there that the Grizzlies are entertaining trade offers. Getting a look at the Grizzlies with and without Ja this season. With, they're 6-12, and without, 10-9.